with the wider public. We brought together a lot of stakeholders, but I also see a very fundamental lack of financing and focus on the topic. We have many bigger projects coming up. One of the projects being the electricity scale-up project. They have an e-waste component, but you will see that usually even for NDEV, the focus is more the access point, and we have to put more focus on e-waste. And maybe, Brian, back to you.
Yeah, very insightful. I mean, unbelievable challenges that we face. I mean, from social aspects of behavioral change to capacity, be it financial, technical, but also a lot of work has to be done around, like you mentioned, the policy environment. And that's why I will turn to Sandra. I need to understand from your experience how you engage the local communities. I mean, Ambassador did mention issues around people holding on to old systems for sentimental reasons. How have you engaged the local communities to involve them in e-waste management?
Thank you, Brian. At Mercy Corps Uganda, in the current e-waste circular economy scale-up project, we have been able to carry out certain activities within the intervention that are bringing communities to participate in the e-waste circular collection, repair, the whole chain. One of them, since we have a team of repair technicians that are trained within the community, and they are repairing the e-waste that has been collected, we also strengthened capacity of various community mobilizers across the various zones of BDBD, and this normally supports on reaching out to households, various households within the community, sensitizing them on the benefits of repairing this faulty lantern or any other solar product that they're having within their household, rather than letting them scatter into the homes, the gardens, and accumulating more waste within. We have sensitized the community structures to supporting them establishing an e-waste cooperative. That is currently one of the things that we are working on, because we thought, yes, in the pilot, we strengthened capacity for repair, collection, and all of that. We activated demand in a way that currently the community is aware that, yes, if I have a faulty lantern, I know where to take to, I know who to contact. But we're like, how can we be able to make sure that these community structures work together to strengthen this business to work? So we are currently supporting the e-waste local systems to set up or establish a community member-based cooperative that is going to run as a business, so that the e-waste community members within BDBD can earn revenues that are going to be generated from the repairs that they are doing, but as well as linking them and interpreting the energy service companies to come on board into the e-waste circular economy solution, so that they are directly linked to the business enterprise. The repair technicians can be able to even work as distributors of various solar products if they are closely linked to the energy service companies, but as well as working with the local government to ensure that the e-waste business is functional, bringing on board Uganda Cooperative Alliance to ensure that they follow up on the functionality of the enterprise, so that the enterprise can continue to do business, earning money from the various repairs collected. Also, we are going ahead with marketing awareness initiatives where the enterprise will be able or will be supported to expand various satellite hubs whereby currently repairs were done centrally, but by having various satellite hubs across the various zones of BDBD, it's going to create accessibility to the repair center, because if I come from a various zone, I have accessibility to a repair center from my zone, rather than the way it was done initially, coming to one centralized point for repair and repurposing. So we're also engaging various community leaders in this initiative to support the project to sensitize the community of ensuring that yes, if you have a lantern in your home or any other product, this is the way to go. So we are closely working with them, engaging them in various activities to ensure that this intervention is sustainable. Also, one other way we are trying to do to ensure that the community participates, since we are trying to generate evidence for scale and ensure that we propose and test various business management models that can work within the community. We are going to map out various local e-waste collectors and repairs within, because there are those local e-waste repairs within the community that currently do not even have much knowledge on how to repair, but at least they are doing it as a business at some point. So we are mapping them out to ensure that their capacity is strengthened, and they will also be integrated within the e-waste cooperative business. Yeah, that we are to set up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sandra. It's interesting that you looked at human psychology. Most times, incentive is everything. If you need people to do the right thing. But also what you've done is decentralizing collection. Most times we're pushing to decentralize the energy access, or not decentralizing the management of these solutions. So thank you for that, Sandra. I'm going to ask Dennis. I mean, everyone has mentioned policy, engagement with government. From your experience, Dennis, for the time you've been working in this space, how would you assess or describe the policy and business environment for US management? But also tell us about the places where you've been, where we could benchmark some of the policies for Uganda.
Well, thank you, Brian, once again. And I think that is the core of everything we're discussing, ladies and gentlemen. GIZ and Mexico, as they are doing their work, there is something called policy that is killing everything. And I want to say this on camera. I want to be very clear to our regulators. That is ICT, the ministry, the KCCA, the Ministry of Trade. I mean, we, the government, you're the leading people producing e-waste. 75% of the 17,000, you're the ones producing this. And only less than 1% brand, less than 1% is being reused or recycled out of all those tonnages produced. So you can see where we're heading to. So in 2008, there was a research by Dr. Lohakana Rubunda about that policy. And we discovered that the policies on solid waste management are quite, they're trying to implement them, they are quite okay, but the e-waste is still silent. The policy on e-waste is still silent. We literally have the legal framework of it to work. I think the colleague from GIZ commented about it. Is literally not working at all. Ladies and gentlemen, let me bring an example. In Europe, companies, when have a beverage company, and you take a soda, you take water, there is that $1, $2 they would put that if you bring back this bottle to us, you'll earn. So she talked about the incentive. So These people, when they go to supermarket and take those things, they remind themselves, they are pushing themselves to, let's collect these bottles, take them back to the producer to earn the dollars, the $10 to $50 out of it. Now, what am I driving at is the EPR. That has been talked about in every conference. EPR is the producer responsibility to manage their products out there. Let me try to explain it. This is how it works. For example, we have Tekino coming into Uganda. We are saying, Tekino, when you bring in your phones and your gadgets in Uganda, make sure out of the stock you brought in, at least 80% is reused or recycled, or there is something you need to import to make sure that you bring it out of the community back to you to either reuse or to add value to it. So that is the EPR that people talk about. It's a corporate responsibility for different producers. And we have companies here that import substandard electronic materials that come on market. And those materials, by the way, to make you aware, the phone you're holding, in China where you're buying it from, or in USA, the EPR is working. What do I mean? The company you're buying it from has the responsibility to look for those materials to collect back. But now when you transfer to Africa, particularly to Uganda, it is left for us to deal with. And the government or the regulatory body has done nothing, yet they're extracting a lot of money from what? From those materials. So one of the policies that is so weak that we need to work on is the EPR. So that we see that these companies that bring in these materials, the government, the ICT, and all other companies, they have the corporate responsibility to make sure that companies like Maseko that have invested are supported to bring back that e-waste use. But there is something also discovered that as your waste that I believe it can work, and that is the ARF. ARF, I mean advanced recycling fee. Advanced recycling fee would work in this way. For example, if Dennis, I have a company and I bring in a container 40 feet of laptops. So what does the ministry do? You impose something, you impose a percentage on each laptop. Let me say if I'm selling a laptop at 800 each, then you're going to sell it at 820. But the 20,000 is deposited to the ministry to support these companies. For example, we run a project with IBF. Let me give you an example. IBF is under Nile Breweries. Now where Nile Breweries is, we have a project of recycling their glass. Now each beer you take, there is a recycling fee. But now what they do, when you pay that money, every money you pay, they deduct off that money. And now when your waste goes in the field, the bars and everything to collect for recycling, when you present, let me say, for example, this month we've collected over 40 tons of, glass, people take beer. 40 tons, we're delivering 40 tons. So when you deliver 40 tons, they weigh, and then they pay for those 40 tons. So that is how we believe in e-waste it can work as well. You bring in your imports, your electronic material, we impose an ARF on it. So for you it is okay, you can find a bin and throw it. Now I'm empowering your waste, I'm empowering Maseko to try and go out there, educate and collect. And I'm telling you, hey Maseko, when you bring me a ton of boards from the phone, I'm gonna pay each at this time. In that way, you're pushing companies to invest more time and energy on trying to curb this e-waste problem. So those are the two policies we thought about that if implemented, we can have a proper streamline of managing the e-waste in Uganda.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks a lot, Dennis. Everything is pointing to one thing: motivation, incentive. It's really how the human mind works. I'm going to now pose a general question that will be responded to by all the parties, depending on the various expertise. When you look at the current business models around management, which ones do you believe would help bridge the gap in U.S. collection and recycling in Uganda? I'll start with Sandra.
Masida will be sharing our experience with your work under JZ. But I think some of the business models or some of the good practices within the various business models that have been implemented and those that are documented. In a refugee setting, you find that if we have a registry or kind of a database of the e-waste that, for example, comes in within the settlement for distribution, and that e-waste is having maybe an kind of online database whereby all the various players have access to such a database. The business that we are supporting to run, the e-waste business enterprise, can be able to have, at least be able to determine the market share of the works they are going to do within BDBD settlement. But currently, there is no registry or any kind of database. So it is something we are trying to create to ensure that the US business enterprise is able to have that solar products maybe tracked, working together with energy service companies. For example, let me use Delight. For example, if Delight is working closely with the business enterprise in BDBD, the business enterprise will be able to ascertain the level of solar equipment sold or distributed because of the database, and it can be able to determine their market share as regards to repair is concerned based on the various products that are being sold or distributed within the area. So that is one thing. Then the other could be having various guidelines in place when it comes to managing waste, both at household level and at business level. For example, I'll just give a scenario of BDBD still the refugee setting, whereby concerning the fact that establishment of various satellite hubs, they have guidelines that
our little company Energrow has been fighting the good fight, and we're very happy to share more about this experience and what we've learned and what we have in store for the future in this panel. Thank you.
My name is Barnabas Mwesigwa, and I'm the Senior Implementation Engineer for Equatorial Power. Equatorial Power is also a solar mini-grid company. It's operating here in Uganda, in DRC, and in Rwanda. So we have built mini-grids across those three countries. Basically, we focus mostly on the rural areas. In Uganda, we have constructed a mini-grid on the island of Lake Victoria called Lore. It's a 600 kilowatt peak mini grid, and it's powering over 3,800 customers. And we also do productive use of energy. We have productive hubs which help to boost the income of the customers. As the previous speaker said, we try as much as possible to make sure that customers consume as much as they can so that our mini grids become bankable. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Henry Semaganda. I work at the ministry and the mini grid unit. I've been working on in the mini grid sector for over 10 years since REA, or Rural Electrification Agency, and which was now mainstream in the ministry, and currently working on all these other projects under mini grid development. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Patrick Mwesige are my names. I'm an energy consultant in town. Here to represent the work we have done for the Ministry of Energy, Renewable Energy Department, with respect to collecting data about productive use of energy since 2021. It is a recognition that actually investments in electricity or in energy per se can actually be accelerated or catalyzed using data that talks into productive use of energy. And we've done this work over the last 3 years, and I'll be happy to share some of the details and what inferences or leads we've obtained from that in the last period. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Henry Jumba. I'm the country coordinator for Get Transform. That is the global energy transformation program that is being implemented by GIZ. And we work with public actors, that is ministries, regulators, to develop these frameworks that can already attract private capital into energy development. In Uganda here, we're working closely with the regulator to improve the enabling environment for mini grids, and here we've done some work already, such as technical standards that can already go ahead to reduce the cost of mini grid development over there. Thank you so much.
Definition of viability, I think, is very broad, but it would be good for every entrepreneur that when you start a business, you know, at least it should cover your costs. You should be able to pay to cover your costs and not rely on subsidies. I think for me that is the definition of viable, but Aaron is already saying no to that. Yeah. So it would be good to really hear this, because I think what you need to just tell me is all the projects which Elizabeth has presented. The development partner-led projects, or nearly all. So, is this the future? Is this what we have to do? And things like that. That's really the idea of the discussion, because I think if we want to develop the sector next year, what are we going to do? What should we put in place? I think this should be the output. What should we do next year to have more mini grids? Yeah. So I'll start with the private sector. I'd like to hear from Mandolis. Mandolis first, I think, Equatorial Power, to just hear from you on this perspective of business models and viability and scale.
Thank you so much. Awesome. So we realized kind of early on that rural communities earn less than urban communities. And so the fact that, you know, people buy electricity on the grid at a particular price, it meant that we had to figure out a way to ensure that electricity in rural areas is at the very least at the same price as electricity on the grid, because otherwise we realize that with an imbalance in tariff, you would have businesses moving away from the rural area to the urban area where electricity costs are lower, especially for productivity. You'd find that, you know, a miller at a mini-grid location where a tariff may be like ours is, you know, about 26 cents a kilowatt hour, they may prefer to move to Gulu, which is, you know, on the grid, where electricity tariffs for productive users can be as low as 13 cents a kilowatt hour for a miller. So it becomes really interesting to kind of figure out how do we make these dots connect. And on our side, we realized that we couldn't only rely on electricity sales as part of our business model. We had to design the technology in a way that it could bring in incomes from not just electricity sales, but also other byproducts, if you may. So that's what took us to having bioenergy as our baseload generation, you know, technology, because with biomass we could absorb agricultural waste from the community, giving them an income from selling their waste, adding towards ability to pay, but also have an output that's either biochar or slurry that would go back into those communities as a soil enhancer or a fertilizer that would basically help improve their incomes as well, but at the same time allow us to earn an income from the sale of those byproducts. So that's kind of how we basically started. And over time, we've been adding on to that model. We added value addition, agriculture processing, removing husks and shells from cobs and grains, because it gets us access to the biomass we need. At the same time, gives us an income from the milling. At the same time, improves the incomes of the communities as well. And we've just kept on adding those, you know, kind of productive users, if you may, on the anchor side. And we've now gone to a point where we realize we could also look now at digital productive users. So data centers, for example, that can run around the clock. It becomes a lot more interesting the further we go. But beginning with agriculture value addition, especially those equipment that most of the people in the village may have not afforded to invest in, and that kind of catalyzes and gets things going. Then we also realized that if we had a 20-year concession, which we are grateful to the ERA for, we could deliver the first 2 years at zero cost, or zero price rather, in exchange for the input of biomass, to catalyze the ability of the community to use those savings to, you know, purchase appliances and to come on board. And so that's been really interesting. It's allowed, you know, us to get everyone to save enough money to buy appliances. So now 2 years in, they're now paying for the electricity, and the appliances have basically come in. So it's been a combination of, you know, cross subsidies linked to the business model, linked to the technology model, and so on and so forth. So, and on the why we have solar and bioenergy together. With solar, we're able to kind of unlock renewable energy credits, and then from the bioenergy, we're able to unlock carbon removal credits as well. And these also, you know, they come in over time. You know, kind of takes about 2 years usually to go through a carbon process, but that's welcome income that helps cross-subsidize as well. Thank you.
Thank you. For Equatorial Power, our mini grids, basically as we know, mini grids are focused on very rural areas, as the previous speaker said. And these are people who have a very low income, we can say. So it is hard to even afford power. So what we have done as Equatorial Power to try to boost the customers to make sure that at least they are able to purchase the power which we provide. We have also introduced something which we call the productive hubs. So the productive hubs are, for example, in Norway, it's like a fishing area. So these are fishermen, mostly that's the major economic activity. So what we do are we set up a plant which produces ice, and this ice is what they use to preserve the fish, like tilapia and Nile perch. So in this way, the clients benefit by having cheaper ice, which they always go to buy in, like, for example, in Ginger. Now they can get it on the island. They don't have to incur that transport. So they are benefiting by getting that service. And also, as Equatorial Power, we also benefit by getting that additional revenue on top of the small tariff, which like the small revenue we get from the energy sales. As I think we all know that it is still quite hard for a mini grid to just survive on energy sales. Though Moses is saying that maybe we should reach that stage where a mini grid can survive on energy sales, I think it is still very far from happening. So we have to get all ways of making sure that we get different revenue streams apart from just energy sales. So that's what, as EP, that's what we are trying to do. So we also do appliance financing together with our partners, Enagro. Actually, on that site, we have worked with Enagro to do appliance financing. So to try and make sure that our customers are consuming more energy, of course, those who can afford, because we also know that since these are low-income earners people, they also tend to find it hard to, again, consume more even when they are willing to consume. So maybe I will bring this point later in the discussion, but we also on the government side and also on our side, we have to try hard and make sure that the tariffs go lower and lower and lower, and that's when our customers will be able to consume more and more and more. Because we know the willingness is there. They are willing to consume, but for some reason they are not able because they can't afford. So we try to strike a balance. How can we help them generate more income and then enable them to consume more energy, which we're providing. But since they are not there, then what else can we do to make sure that we survive, like the company survives and the mini grid survives? We run all the operation costs as we also help our customers grow. So that's why we have to bring in these other extra services, which will act as other revenue streams just apart from the energy. Yeah, thank you.
Do you mind?
Sure,
Moses?
go on.
I'm not a developer, but
Go ahead.
I had the privilege before being the CEO of Energo to have run and helped co-create the industry association of all of the mini grid companies in Africa. So when I was CEO of AMDA, what we realized was that every mini grid company on the continent faced the exact same challenges that you're hearing about today. So this is not a Uganda problem. This is not a Peter and Barnabas problem. This is, we are asking people to do very hard things in very hard places problem, right? If you put a mini grid in Kampala, it would make tons of money and they could charge a national tariff from the first day. That is not what we were asking them to do. We are saying to go into the middle of nowhere, into a small community that's very hard to reach, and build a profitable business in this place where no one is making any money doing anything, right? And what we really need to be clear on is that, yes, you can create a business in those communities that would eventually become profitable, but you need to have either an enormous amount of time or an enormous amount of money to do that, right? And we are trying to do something very, very quickly in this area, which is not really an option without an enormous amount of money. And how do we attract this private investment is to allow a way for them to make a lot of money. If I'm going to put a lot of money into something, I want to get a lot of money out of something, right? And I think this is where the productive uses of energy argument comes in, where, as Peter said, you have to have alternative revenue streams, and this is what we're working on with Equatorial Power as well. I will give one other developer's perspective. This is Husk Power. Husk Power is operating in India and in Nigeria, and they are the only mini-grid company that has so far claimed to have their first profitable quarter globally, right? They have like 300 mini-grids. And they have just announced that they have just had, after 15 years, their first profitable quarter. None of these guys are becoming millionaires. All of the arguing about 29-cent tariff, 30-cent tariff, this is not really helping investment come in. This is not really helping the companies reach the scale that they need to move towards profitability. Now, Husk Power is planning to have an IPO, which means they're going to go public. They're going to be listed on the stock exchange because they're finally going to be big enough and interesting enough to investors that all the money that we want to see can finally go in. After all this time, right? If we want to see even one additional company reach that, right? They're not, by the way, they're not becoming profitable because of their work mostly in Africa. It's mostly in India because the population is so large there. So here, it's a different conversation. And we really need to focus on the realities and the challenges of the businesses on the ground. Yes, if we want to have a low tariff, we can argue about the financial model, et cetera. But like this little Excel table is not going to help people in the village use more electricity, right? We need to be working on alternative ways to get income for these mini-grid companies. And how has Husk Power done that? They've done it exactly the same way as Barnabas and Peter just described. Husk Power only has 1/3, 30% or so of its revenue comes from electricity. 70% of its revenue comes from carbon, productive uses, water as a service, charging as a service, crypto mining, like all this crazy stuff that these companies are being forced to do because selling electricity is not enough. But if we want to have the mini-grid sector be an energy service provider, then they need partners. And this is what Energrow is trying to do. We are trying to take this burden off of their shoulders so that the power company can just sell power. And then Energrow, or a company like Mandulis that's already mastered doing everything, can partner with other mini-grid companies to say, let me show you how to do this, or let me provide this service for you. Because we don't need to have 100 companies that are all responsible for like rural development in general, right? We want the power company to just focus on what they're doing best, just focus on the power. If they want to do other things, that's fine, but we should have service providers that allow them to focus on their specialization. And so Energrow, very briefly, I've already talked too much. You know, we have been very successful in helping mini-grid companies increase their demand, right? And in 6 months, the pilot communities we are working in are consuming more than 400% more power than they were before, right? So this changes the economic model for mini-grids dramatically. And it's not going to work everywhere in the same way, but it shows that this is a part of the puzzle that we need in order to bring these 500 mini-grids online in 5 years, right? And so if we want those 500 mini-grids to come on, we have to make those 500 mini-grids look very, very attractive to these investors. 500 mini-grids is hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. And right now, we have a couple of mini-grid companies here in Uganda that have been struggling to raise even their first few million. And now we need to like 100x that in 5 years. So the mission now is not to argue about tariffs. The mission now is how do we make this as attractive as possible? And once they have 100 mini-grids per company, then they can all reduce their tariffs anyways. The problem now is they're working in like 3 locations. So how are they going to like make everything super cheap, right? So I think this is the the conversation I would like to have. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Just before, maybe just tell us briefly about your business model, like maybe with like a real example. Yeah.
Very simple. We're a microfinance company, but we only finance productive assets. So if you want an agricultural processing machine, if you want an electric cooking device, if you want some carpentry equipment, a welding machine, you come to us, we give you a loan, and you as a small business in the community, you're going to make more money. Power company is happy, and we're making money on the microfinance and also on some carbon credits.
Great, thanks. Yeah, maybe I'd like Patrick to also share a little bit about your work with productive use, because it's, I will definitely come back to this topic, but yeah, it would be good to hear, Patrick, about your work.
Yeah, thank you, Moses. The work that we've done so far, just like the preceding speakers have said, is basically to help these mini-grid investors and developers to have data intelligence in terms of designing and locating their mini-grids. With Columbia World Projects, which is really a project of the Columbia University in New York, what we did over the last 3 years is basically to traverse the country, about 100 districts, identifying productive use potential that is currently not being served by grid or any other mini-grid activity or whatever it is. The data we have to date has about 13,600 identified points of PUEs, and about 6,000 of those are in a mini-grid, kind of out of the grid areas, and the balance is within the grid footprint, surprisingly. So what really happens is to say that if these investors have access to this data, which now are like data assets, they can design and they can locate these mini-grids using these PUEs as anchor loads. And we did also, just like Enagro has suggested, we did also a pilot in Lamour as part of our study. We identified about 50 millers who were using diesel for doing their milling activities. And these millers were convinced to convert to electricity. And the mills, the motors were actually given as part of the study to see what is going to be the impact on the mini-grid in Lamour once these 50 millers have logged onto the network. The about 8 months data that has been collected has really been stunning, because we recognize that in terms of grid loading capacity, the mini-grid moved from the highs of 38% or earlies of 41% into 67%. What does this mean? It means that the mini-grid is actually able to make more money, but better sales than before. Why? Because these PUEs are working mostly during the day, and solar is at its best in that window. So from an economics and viability point of view, the viability indices just go up with this situation. So we believe that looking ahead, including the data that and the projects that Elizabeth was outlining, we believe that all these initiatives can harness this data to benefit them in terms of locating, in terms of designing and sizing the mini-grids using PUEs as anchor loads, as even they target household consumers and any other community initiatives. That's where we are so far. I will say something later about what we are trying to do now with the UECCC vis-a-vis partly what Enagro is doing regarding appliance providers and people like that. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Yeah, interesting conversation. Would be good to hear from the regulator, of course, because the tariff issue. I can give him this mic. Patrick, I'll just send it over to you.
Excuse me, but before Patrick comes in, we actually recognize that for existing PUEs who are using other sources, for example, fossil fuels or diesel, to move from, say, an average tariff of, I don't know, 60 or 50 cents to 29 is golden. So they would be more than happy to do that. So when you think about the opportunity cost of staying where they are to what they are doing, it's really compelling. It's a compelling picture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moses, and thank you very much, fellow panelists and the rest of the participants. The issue of policy and regulatory environment for mini-grids is can really get sticky in terms of satisfying the need that we have for mini-grid electrification. I will also join my colleagues to recognize that compared to the grid, mini-grid space is very heterogeneous. It can make sense to make a comparison between what is happening on the grid in the different countries. But when it comes to mini-grids, we have to really get very careful because, you see, for the grid, power is predominantly used for marketable products and services, whereby you find that there's a product in Europe, Asia, Africa, whether you want to call it sugar, whether you want to call it steel, and the price of that product can be comparable for parity purposes. But when it comes to mini-grids that are serving rural areas, a rural area in Uganda, in Nigeria, in the US, can really have a lot of heterogeneity. And that brings us to the challenge that we must face based on the circumstances we have in Uganda. One big thing that, there are things that we all must agree on. And the first thing to agree on is that there is a need to satisfy. Two, the reason why this need exists is because neither the private nor the government has been able to satisfy it. It means that either we must energize one side to satisfy this need, or if one side cannot be catalyzed to satisfy it alone, then we need to see how the two sides must work together to ensure that this need is satisfied. And that leads us to what we deal with as the public-private partnership model for mini-grid implementation. We all know that whenever a market has a need, the market itself will create its own supply. So there is an area to be electrified, and there is somebody who sees an opportunity to go and electrify that area. Somebody will mobilize money, jump in, satisfy the need, collect revenues, break even, become a going concern, manage the competition, and everybody becomes happy. We are in a situation, and I remember, maybe Aaron, around 2017, there was a fifth mini-grid conference in Accra. And the discussion that time was that it looks that mini-grid sustainability may not mean 100% private investment. It looked, and it still looks, that there must be a blend of sustainable subsidies and then private investment. Now, sustainable subsidies mean that as much as possible, we should avoid direct subsidization. We subsidize at project development up to commissioning, and then we let the revenues from the project be able to sustain the operations and the return, the capital on the investment. Now, if you must give sustainable subsidies, it might be 60%, it might be 80%. But the smaller the investment of the private investor, probably the higher the return you have to give them for you to give them the incentive to keep operating this this business for a slightly longer period. Now, we must see mini-grids as the mini-grid business modeling, not as pure private investment, but as a blend of social investment and private investment. And even the kind of investors we must attract, like Elon, like Peter Njeko, are the investors who know that they have a desire to make money, but most importantly, a duty to stimulate economic activities in the areas where they operate. Because they are going to areas, like he said, where people do not know much about economic activity. Some of them are lucky to be using diesel to do milling, but there are many others who, what they know about energy is the candle they light and the firewood that they use for cooking. And the duty of the entrepreneur there is actually to tell them that your life is going to be better if we stimulate, but we also must generate some incomes for you, to stimulate incomes for you, for us to be able to benefit from getting revenue from you. Now, the two sticker issues. How much should these people pay? How much should these investors receive? That's one. On the other side, the sustainability of this business is going to depend on how long they are able to operate in this field. Now, we recognize that the ideal business going concern model is that the person should go enter a community and operate for as long as they please and for as long as it becomes viable for them to operate in that. But the risk that mini-grid stand is that there are many reasons why the grid might come. And when the grid comes, there are many implications in terms of business. And therefore, what seems to be a consensus for mini-grid investment is that the government must give some reasonable assurance that either the grid is not going to come in some period of time, or when it comes, I'm not going to be sent home packing and empty-handed. So the discussion we've had, and the discussion we need to continue having, is that what level of exposure does government sit on by committing to compensate a mini-grid when the grid arrives? And I think for me, I would want to see the consensus going towards dichotomizing the mini-grid space and say, for example, for islands, probably we are not likely to see, we are least likely to see a grid extending to an island. And maybe we can say that whatever limitations and risk mitigation in terms of exposure to the contingency liability of government compensating a mini-grid when the grid arrives should probably not apply to an island, and therefore islands would have some open concession periods as we try to solve the issue of what concession period becomes more optimal for the mini-grids on the land. But I think for me, what I need all of us to appreciate is that nobody would be and deserves to be interested in curtailing the operational period of a mini-grid, except to the extent of the need to limit the risk that falls onto the government in the likely event. And in Uganda, mini-grids, grid extension really is a little more dynamic and controlled by players outside this room. It is a political matter, it is a social matter, and therefore, when we make decisions in rooms, we do not assume to have a lot of control on when the grid is going, even when we have projections. So the issue is that when it happens for the very first time, there is something written on paper on what is supposed to happen. But if the day it happens will actually tell us the kind of business environment that we are seated on in terms of the ease with which the two parties agree on what happens next when the grid has arrived in light of what a private investor has invested. So the discussion should be, how do we continue to engage to ensure that probably the investor takes their reasonable risk, but also government gives minimum assurance. For me, the best assurance would be that the grid should not come. However, nobody is going to give you that assurance if the grid tariff is 21 cents, and then for you to break even, you require 50. It's not that 50 is not a reality, but there are questions on whether people can be committed to that level of tariff for a longer time. So it's not an easy balance. Probably we shall have discussions on how we can move towards a consensus, but we have, of course, gotten feelers that there is a bit of discomfort in terms of how it's currently being handled. And I think the discomfort is everywhere, even the policy and regulatory circles, but the solution is not on the plate. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Patrick. Yeah, maybe I'll do just two more questions for Henry, and then we'll take a couple of questions. Patrick, I wanted to ask you, but I will ask this later, whether you think the regulation is really helping to scale mini-grids or actually becoming a barrier to how fast mini-grids are being deployed. That would be something just to think about. Are we really over-regulating the market and making it just hard for people to just innovate and do things which make sense, because we don't know what makes sense, and things like that, but we'll come back to that. And maybe I just want to come to Get Transformed, because just like Liz presented, a lot of, and also Henry here presents GIZ, I hope also a bit of EU. So we have seen that a lot of projects are being financed by grant money. And yeah, basically that's it. It looks like without a development partner funding a project, there's no project. So yeah, would like to hear from you on first of all, okay, what you've done as GIZ or as EU as Get Transformed, and what is your approach is towards really helping the sector, because it might be that also as development partners, maybe the way you're doing something is actually discouraging companies to do something which could work, because maybe we are wrong. I mean, I'm not a development partner, but I was before. So yeah, would be good to hear from you on that before we go to the policy.
No, thank you, Moses. That is very interesting. Hopefully, the development partners are not put on the spot for distorting the market for mini-grids. But on the other note, if you look at the level of risk that is associated with mini-grids, you have to appreciate that, just like Patrick has mentioned, it has to be a concerted effort in a public-private partnership approach. Just going back to what Elizabeth presented, when GIZ, again with support from the EU, and then of course the German government, BMZ, set out to do this Pro-Mini-Grids project in partnership with the ministry and the regulator, we, for example, first of all, recognize that this is a nascent market. And with that, to attract the private sector into this market, you had to do certain things. Now, those things included not only the enabling environment, but issues to do with scaling. It had to do with productive use. It had to do with business models. Now, the reason why we went via the PPP, again, through the bundled tender, is to address some of these risks. Because we treat the mini-grid as a utility, which is not true, just like what Aaron mentioned. Now, the utility operates on three things, yeah? Three efficiencies. One is operational efficiency, and here you're dealing with larger concessions, yeah? So in other words, you achieve economies of scale and you reduce your cost. The second is the financial efficiency. Now, we have to appreciate that the utility has certain efficiencies that the mini-grid doesn't have. One of them is liquidity, yeah? And that means that they can easily convert their assets into cash or even participate in the capital markets to do stock exchange, and they can attract investment into the utility. So that is the other aspect. But then also the positive cash flows that these utilities have. The mini-grids are starting out. Their balance sheets are basically negative, yeah? Into negatives. They cannot attract any opportunities out there. The third efficiency that the utility has is the transparency in reporting. Now, the reporting rules are clear, they're automated, and the cost of this has gone down. We have to appreciate that the mini-grid at this scale cannot do anything regarding those three areas. Now, what we set out to do as GIZ, again, through, for example, Get Transform, is how can we work with the ministry and the regulator to already address some of these aspects. So what we've done is we've done the technical standards for mini-grids, because you will appreciate that if you're going to develop a mini-grid using the utility scale standards, the cost is going to be very high. You're going to, for example, subject them to terms and conditions. Let me give you an example. If you are going to ensure that there is continuity of supply and uninterrupted supply, you, for example, say, well, you have to provide a service level of 24 hours with non-interruption. Now, for a mini-grid that is already struggling with covering the operations, and it is not even automated, how are they going to do this? Yeah? So you have to take into account all these aspects. So what we set out to do is, let's develop standards that are customized. If the utility says, let's say you provide, or you respond to, for example, interrupted supply in 24 hours, maybe for a mini-grid we say you can do 48 hours, yeah? Because we understand that maybe there are logistics involved, the team is not on ground to respond in time, and maybe you'd have to incur an additional cost to do it. So we looked at some of these things out there. But then also, Moses, regarding your question on, for example, development partners distorting the market perhaps, or are they doing something that is already inhibiting the entry of new entrants into the market? I would say it has to be a balanced effort. It has to be a balanced effort, because if you leave it strictly to the private sector, just like what Patrick presented, then they're going to run into some of these risks again. So actually what development partners do, for example, as GIZ, is not to directly invest into the mini-grid, but how can we ensure there is proper coordination of the stakeholders involved, and that the interest of each stakeholder is presented and addressed. Maybe the other aspect that I want to emphasize is the regulation in place at the moment, yes, can already indicate that there is a good signal for the private sector to invest, but we have to understand that this is a learning experience. If the ministry and the regulator are learning that, for example, the concession in place of 10 years or 15 years is not viable, can we try something? Yeah? Can the regulation be flexible enough to say that we can revise it to meet certain, periods that can already ensure that these guys are not struggling? Because at the end of the day, it's the private sector struggling, and the government needs to listen to it. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Henry. Thanks a lot, Henry. Maybe Henry Semaganda. Elizabeth presented here, but I have a question. It might not have been in your questions, but you can just see what's best. First of all, mini-grid developers, they tell me, because for me now I'm a consultant, that it takes them long just to get a site. I don't want to go into these nitty-gritties, but do you think that as the ministry, there are certain things you're doing which maybe you should give to somebody else or not be doing, especially, for example, Elizabeth has presented here a couple of projects, but I mean, the country is so large and there's so many projects going on that mini-grids are only taking a piecemeal of public money. What do you think is causing that in the ministry? Because these development partners or the funders, they do come to you as the ministry, but then when you prepare such a big project, which is even loans that customers will pay through taxes, why is it mostly going to grid and even solar home systems? Nowadays, I think the big catch is also PUE. It's becoming a big topic. But somehow mini grids, we are still just piloting. Small money here, 2 million here, or 500,000 here, and it's, yeah, what's your view on that?
Yeah, thank you, moderator. First and foremost, we all know that mini grid implementation is guided by the electrification master plan, which is in place. So all these projects we have been implementing have been based on that master plan. So the question you posed, that why is there a delay in the confirmation of the sites? First and foremost, maybe sometimes it is caused by the developers themselves identifying their own sites, and then you have to validate them with the master plan. So currently, I think what we are doing is that maybe we are thinking of publishing all the available sites to ensure that maybe if you have an interest in development of a mini grid, you can identify a site, then you just come to the ministry for confirmation. Then I know there are other delays, especially on the development stage. We know that when a site is allocated to the developer, there are other things you're supposed to do. Especially, for example, you have to do feasibility studies. Then you apply for a license at the regulator side. But again, you find that these developers, when you allocate sites to them, some of them maybe end up just keeping quiet with the sites. But as the ministry, what we are trying to resolve that by maybe in the confirmation of the sites, we have to put a condition that these sites are supposed to be implemented in the given period of time. So if you fail to show a progress, the sites are taken away from you. Then you talked about the scale-up project. What I know is, yes, it is true that most mini-grid projects are donor-funded. We get grants from the developmental patterns, especially GIZ and also KFW now. Yeah, we have the scale-up project. But in the scale-up project, we have also a component of off-grid. So we are, and we know when you talk about off-grid, also mini-grids are part of the off-grid solutions. So again, within that scale-up project, we hope that we shall be able to unlock and maybe package a project through the available funds to also implement the mini-grids. So besides that, maybe I'll also respond to, I'll add to what Henry Jumba was talking about. As a ministry, I know we have different barriers in the mini-grid implementation, but again, with support from GIZ, we are planning to do some studies to unlock some of those barriers. And among the studies, we have the standardization of the concession framework, because what has been there, we knew, I know most of you know that maybe on the mainland we have a concession period of 10 years, then the islands maybe 15 or 20 years, but you find that sometimes even the regulator has a guide to guide that actually maybe for this we can do this, we can do this. So we want to have a standardized concession framework which will guide on the concession. Of course, we shall work with the regulator. Also, we plan to do a subsidy, also a standardized subsidy framework, which will guide on the which level of subsidy to be given to especially these PPP projects. Because as you know, we have also just under pilots. For example, for the pro-mini grids, we had a subsidy of around 60, given up to the capex cost of the generation units. And also this gate access is also following almost the same scenario. So we don't know which level of subsidy can be given. So, and you find that along the implementation, along the operation, you find the developer is already complaining that maybe the project is not viable. So we need to know which level of subsidy can be given. So a study is going to be done. And also in addition to that, we have, again, with the support from GIZ. So GIZ, actually, we thank GIZ for the support in the mini-grid sector. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Henry. Yeah. So thanks, everyone. Our time is really fast spent, but I would like to take a few questions from the team, from the group. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's a very beautiful discussion. What I hear mostly... Yeah, my name is Owin Hakim. I work with EB. We make e-mobility electric bicycles. So yeah, we're promoting demand for electricity as well. Yeah, my question goes to the regulator. In your submission, I highlight it's very challenging to enforce contracts to the investors investing in mini-grid. From your discussion, that's how do we ensure that contracts are enforced and we create a predictable marketing environment for mini-grid from the regulatory standpoint and government standpoint, because that is very key. Then the other one, I have a question for Peter. Getting off-grid, how do we ensure that actually, your question, the question still goes to you, that most of this energy demand in rural areas, what are these mini-grids are providing is basically population enhancement and building human capital. How do we ensure that the people developing human grid, they are well supported, they have a special place in the government? Because when you see energy, see the positive feedback loop it brings in terms of in education performance, economic performance, and all that. How do we ensure, and they are doing what government's supposed to be supporting the population with and improving on human capital? How do we ensure that we give them a playing field, since they are enormously contributing to the government, to the transformation and pursuing economic goals? Then Aaron from Energy, you talked of regulating the mini-grid providers. The market, I feel like it's still in the early stage, and normally the market has its classical dynamics. Those who are more efficient in terms of technology, in terms of human resource, in terms of some of them we see today in the next 5 years, they may not be there, and the most efficient one. Why don't we let the market be free and the more effective players stand out? And that then will determine, then it takes its own time. Otherwise, when you put regulation early, you're more likely to eliminate other talents. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Abdul-Chan Kansivambi from Centenary Bank. In Centenary Bank, we're providing what we call the power connection loans. These are supposed to increase utilization of electricity, because most times you generate a lot of power and you find people are not connecting just because of initial costs, like the wiring and paying for certificates. So we quite a bit bridge that gap, and someone was asking how electricity access scale-up project comes in, and the power connection loan is part of that financing. It comes more cheaply. So we'll feel happy to partner with these mini-grid providers so that all the energy you produce is utilized. And that's another way of making you viable. We've done it with Wenreco in West Nile, where we are able to pilot this project, and it worked to an extent that at a certain level, Wenreco didn't have enough power to support, to connect people. That's how we ended up. So we request that we become your partners. The other thing is we need soft and patient capital in mini-grid financing. But we know mini-grids play a very big role in reducing emissions. How can they access the cheap financing? We know climate change financing is available, the green bonds, the carbon credits. How can we play a role there to get cheap and patient capital to invest in our mini-grids for a long time? Someone talked about 15 years. You can't use the available borrowing from our financial institutions to finance such projects. Yet they play a very big role, like the previous person said, in transforming these rural communities. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for your submission. Adding on what he's saying, my name's Rose Twine. I'm into quick pots, or the commonly branded as pressure cookers, which don't get too much access into the rural areas where there's no electricity. So my question is it possible to partner with you, or if you're passing on these mini grids, to partner with the people you're passing it on, so that the uptake is more? And also, you're talking about more consumption. And I think that's the best way we can consume more of your power, using the pressure cookers, because clean cooking is needed in those areas. As long as there's a hard to reach with no power, I guarantee there's no clean cooking right there. So I think we'll have a further conversation after here, where we can probably exchange numbers and see how we can get into your areas.
Thank you so much. My name is Olga Namatovu, and I work with GIZ, also on mini grids. My question is going to Aaron. So there is this general assumption that the deployment of PUE may not be competitive in the global markets. The fact that, particularly for the mini grid sites, because the tariff is a bit high, yeah? So with the assets you're deploying, what has been your experience in terms of viability, the businesses being able to increase their incomes at the same time, being able to afford the tariff, and also grow the business that they've invested in? Yeah, could you just talk about that? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Josephine Birunji. I'm a research associate from Makerere University Business School. Mine goes to Patrick from ERA. As the regulator, have you considered, because to achieve a balance is kind of out of reach for the mini grids for sustainability, are you thinking about dynamic tariff structures, say for support of PUE services to boost demand for high load users? So if such mechanisms, could they be viable as a business model, or from the tariff side, to structure based on usage or load? Thank you.
Then, yeah, we'll be actually wrapping up this session because of time. So
should we just start like on the end and then we go?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Maybe I'll start from the last question. Josephine, when we talk about tariff structuring and putting incentives in terms of what tariff is charged at a time of the day and for what use. The main consideration, one, the issue is that whatever way you structure the tariff, it should recover the cost that you intend it to recover. Now, the constraints that we normally find with the mini grids and the grid in rural areas, that's not maybe given that we have not been having the one grid operator, is that there is little flexibility in terms of how you can structure a tariff. For example, you go to an area and probably you find that either most of the load is, for example, if it is a solar mini grid and has some good PUE activities, find that most of the load is actually during daytime. So in that case, you first of all have to think about what are you trying to incentivize. And what you are trying to incentivize will determine whether you're giving it a lower tariff or a higher tariff. So if you have most of the load, like 80% of the load being during the day, then you probably have nothing to incentivize, because after all, the costs of generation for a solar mini grid are higher, are lower during the daytime. So, and you see, there is small energy that you're selling in the evening, and you're selling it to poor people for domestic use. And most of them are buying 2-3 units a month, 5 units a month. So there is little flexibility in terms of achieving that objective. But as you know, it is something that we pursue and try to do very well on the grid. I wanted to comment on the issue of the e-cooking for mini grids. I think that subject also to load management, I think e-cooking is one of the very good cases we have for productive use improvement, especially in areas where people are spending money on charcoal. You go to areas, maybe some people are picking firewood at zero cost, but for areas where people are buying charcoal, I think mini grids need to look at it as an important factor, of course subject to the fact that the sun is very low in the evening, and that's when many people would want to cook. So it means that it also imposes additional costs of managing that evening load. But for me, I think it's something that mini grids need to take very, very carefully. Enforcement of contracts, the issue I raised was that if you sign many contracts and you have not had experience in enforcing a single one of them, is that you are carrying a risk whose magnitude you are not sure of. That's what I said. So you say that if you say mini grids are nascent, we are having many mini grids, the government is guaranteeing compensation. By the way, when I say compensation, I take note that there are other options, but it looks like compensation is the most suitable, because if you're to retain an embedded generator, a mini grid that is embedded generator, it also has a consequence on the price at which you are going to pay for that energy. So it is as good as compensation, because you're probably paying a higher price for generation, much higher than the rest of the generation that you're bringing on the grid. So when you carry those contracts forward and you have not had experience on enforcing a single one of them, it's also a risk on its own. Playing field for actors. Now, for me, colleagues, what I want us to see that in this room, we have had sentiments of high price for mini grids. We have had high sentiments of deregulating, and we have had the sentiments of facilitating investors, giving them incentives, and also protecting them. It means that the understanding or the interests of the different players in this room, for them to be merged into a regulatory policy, it's not something that is very easy. Like I said at the beginning, the ideal would be let everybody go and provide the service, charge prices according to market. To me, that would be ideal. Now, the issue is that would it actually bring investment? Maybe it would not, because you're not very sure of when the grid is arriving. And if the grid is arriving, you're not likely to carry away your grid and your generation. So the reason why regulation ends up coming is against the thinking that this regulation policy might be facilitative, might facilitate the private sector. But for me, from my economics understanding, is that if we can have indicators that the market can sort out itself, the best way is to let the market operate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll basically, talk into, I mean, the thing is, for us, mini grids that go in directly to talk to the government, not through the bidding process, that's the first thing that the government does do, giving us the opportunity to have that conversation, identify a location and work together on figuring out how to get across the line. So for us, it's usually a little bit different because we go to the private markets and raise the money and get everything done from generation, distribution to last mile connections. And so it becomes a case of really kind of a bilateral between the developer and the government. So we build our business models without thinking about subsidies. We build our business models by looking at what we need to do to make sure the company is alive in the 20 years or so that we need to provide a service. We've got to think about how that village will grow into a parish, into a town, into a city if need be. We've got to think and go, what are the resources in that village? And which big companies need those resources? If it's mangoes, at what price should we have our tariffs so Coca-Cola can do the pre-processing in that village? How can we attract investment from the nearby town to the village itself? And so the approach when we go away from the DFI-led approach is totally different. So in fact, so for us, the DFI approach sometimes does work in parallel in many ways, because you will only push the interests of those who win the tenders. You will not look at the interests of the other companies who do the hard work, and you'll not acknowledge the work that we do. So that can be a challenge, at times, and there are things to be learned across, across the way. So we sometimes find it's easier to, kind of build and then share, because it's all about sharing the knowledge, sharing the experiences, and growing sustainably. So from that side, and because the government, as you mentioned, is, it's not just regulatory, it's also political, and it's also of the people. So in the end, it's so dynamic that ultimately the market does end up deciding what ends up happening. And if an investment has been put into an area based on numbers that were thought about 10 years ago, and the market changes today, politics will follow what's going on, ultimately, as will the market. But it becomes a massive risk when investment has gone in, let's say before 1996, assuming that there was no internet. Then the internet comes in. That becomes a white elephant. So there's need for a lot more collaboration, and there's need for a lot more, figuring out how everyone's boxes can be ticked, while at the same time acknowledging that the sector is fluid, the market is fluid, and ultimately it's the final consumer who we've got to think about, and we've got to think about the National Development Plan, where Uganda or any other countries looking to be in 10, 20, 30 years, and go, how can whatever we're doing lead towards that? And so, so it's an exciting space to be. We learn every minute, every day, and the best thing we can do is to repent, as the minister said 2 days ago, when we haven't gotten there fast enough, and have hope and have faith that we can learn from our challenges and grow. Thank you.
That's hard to follow up, but so a couple of questions were addressed to me, and I've got a couple of ideas that I wanted to share. So I'm just going to kind of, instead of addressing each one, sort of weave a bit of a narrative. So one of the challenges that I think we see across the continent, and in Uganda in particular, is that we're really, really, really focused as it's very logical to focus on this as well, but we're really focused on fairness in the moment right now for consumers and for businesses. But we have a national objective that is about a very specific thing, which is about dramatic increase of electrification rates over a short period of time. And so in the interest of being fair, I really have to say that we are preventing progress on national priorities in many ways. Because what we really need to do is to give companies permission to figure out what works. And the only way to do that quickly is to make it easy for these companies to succeed, right? And what does that mean? Right now, the biggest competition for money for the private sector, for entrepreneurs, is the government treasury bond rate being at 14 or 15%. So Centenary Bank, what did we hear? Centenary Bank is not going to put money for 20 years into a mini-grid project. Why? Because you make 14% on a treasury bond every single year. It's the safest investment in the country. And the IRR of a mini-grid is not at 14% unless you're squeezing it and tweaking it and pinching it and moving it, right? So the money is not going to go into this sector until we make the IRR easy to achieve at 18 or 20%, right? And this is complicated because that means, oh wow, these guys have to make 20% return per year. That's like a really attractive investment. But they're working with poor people. So we can't have them making too much money, right? And so that's the contradiction. We don't want them to make too much money because they're working with poor people, but we have to allow them to make enough money to be attractive to investors, which is above this high percent. So how do we do that, right? Getting to Olga's question in the back, productive uses is part of that answer. Productive uses are not struggling because of the cost of power. Productive uses are succeeding because people are making money despite the cost of power. And if we can really help diversify the local economy, to Peter and Patrick's point, you're looking when you're planning at, what is the economic opportunity in this village today. That is relevant if you're thinking about it now, but when you're thinking about it from an investor's perspective, today is totally unimportant. Where is this community going to be in 10 years? You should look at a community that was connected 15 or 20 years ago. You should look at what they are doing, and that's the opportunity, right? So you look at Mukono, and parts of Mukono are still unconnected, but neighboring communities have been connected. You look at the difference between those two, a community in Mukono that was connected 10 years ago and the community that might be connected tomorrow, they're completely different. Completely different. It's not like there's one economic activity that's like really driving that village. It's that tons of stuff is happening, right? And we need to really think about, okay, how can we make it so that we're not just focusing on like the agricultural milling machine, right? But we look at, people will move to the community. In Mukono, in the Utilities 2.0 community that I think Barnabas will mention in a minute, Equatorial Power saw every single empty building in that community become occupied within 6 months because electricity arrived. So there's no really predicting exactly what's going to happen, but we need to be looking at how can we make it easy for these communities to succeed. And I think that this is all I want to say. But the real challenge is this tension that we see between building the perfect marketplace and finding the perfect price and allowing these companies to make enough money so that they can get investment to experiment and find different things that work in different places. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Moses. First of all, I want to react on the comment from Patrick about merging mini grids and the main grid. I think it was also one of the points we had to discuss. So I want to give a case study of the project which we have done in Mukono district in a village called Chiumu. In this village, we had actually a site in Chiumu, and then we had another control village in Nyenje. Nyenje is connected to the grid, and Chiumu was like not connected. So we had to install a mini grid in Chiumu, and we had to study these two places, these two villages, in terms of the rate of development and in terms of connectivity. And I want to tell you that in 1 year, we connected 360 customers, new connections, and in Nyenje, there were 3 new connections in that village in 1 year, in a period of 1 year. The consumption rate of Chiumu rose from 1 kilowatt hour per month up to 10 kilowatt hours per month per customer. That is per customer. And that was in 1 year. That is how big the rate of growth was in terms of connection, thanks to productive use. So, and then also, I think mini grids have this chance of like being so close to their customers. So in that, we do a lot of community engagements. So I think for us, we do it more than the main utility actors. So we tend to kind of raise the community awareness about power consumption quicker. So the take-up rate is so high. And from the standpoint of equatorial power, we are not worried about the main grid coming. Actually, in this Utility 2.0, the Chiumu project, we knew that the grid was coming, and the advantage is that mini grids are preparing this area to become attractive for the main grid to bring the grid. Because, you know, the connection, first of all, the connection rate for a customer on the main grid is more expensive than a mini grid, actually. Like the cost the customer has to pay to get connected. I think on that part, the main grid is still expensive compared to the mini grids. So our customer, the connection rate tends to be very high. So even the main grid will find it attractive to extend the grid to that place where the consumption rate is already high, people have already knowledge about power, and the mini grid actually can be shifted to another area. So, for example, this was a 40 kilowatt plant, which was powering 360 customers, and now the main grid came, we decommissioned the plant, and the grid connected. So this project is done in such a way that the distribution network is up to standard of the main distribution network. So you don't have to worry that maybe these will be 2 different grids which won't be able to be integrated. So what Umeme did was just to bring a transformer and power the existing network. So it is easy to integrate, and this same plant can be transferred to another site, and we do the same experiment. So it means a small plant of 40 kilowatts, which is powering 360 customers in just one village, can actually be used to power more than 1,000 customers if this model is replicated in other places. Because it is powering 300, then it is transferred to another place, you get more 300, the grid comes, powers them, you go and go to another village and do the same. So I think with this we can even increase the electrification rate. So I guess it's not a bad thing, and I appeal to maybe the regulator and the ministry to consider this. I think we should try this pilot somewhere else. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten any other site where we can try this, but in the peri-urban areas, this is a model which can really work, and we have tried it and we have seen that it can work. Yeah, so maybe to hint about the PUEs, it's true there is some limitation right now with the mini grids, and as one of the speakers said, people always cook in the evenings, and that is the time when there's no more solar power, like the sun is gone, and now we are relying on the batteries, and that is the time when we have to preserve what we have kept in the battery, and yet that is the time the customer would want to cook. So we find it a bit tricky, but we have actually worked with Enagro and MEX to deploy some of the electric pressure cookers on our site in Lore. And we also tried to sensitize our customers if at all it is possible for you to prepare some food a bit earlier and maybe keep it in a flask or somehow, you can do that. And then you can, if you can't, then you can try to do it at least in the early hours of the evening, not late in the evening, because it will affect our operations in such a way that we find ourselves depleting the batteries a bit early, and maybe we shall have to run the generator if we have to maintain a certain service level, or the whole area will just go into darkness if we don't have to run a backup generator. So I think we need to do some sensitization on how we can use the PUEs. Otherwise, it's also a good thing, and it really boosts consumption of the customers. Yeah, thank you.
I will just comment on the e-cooking. As we all know, we have Ministry has a PUE strategy, and within that strategy, e-cooking is among the approaches which are being promoted, and also including even mini grids. So on this, again with the GIZ, we are going to pilot e-cooking on the northern, the pro-mini grids projects. We are going to pilot and see the impact. Also, with another pattern, University of Southampton, UK, we are going to pilot also the same on the Changeojo mini grids. We have some mini grids in Changeojo, 2 mini grids, which we are upgrading, but the University of Southampton is also going to support in piloting e-cooking on those mini grids. So it will inform us on the maybe future projects. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Mine is simple to say for investors who are spreading out into unreached areas, we are looking forward in the year ahead to facilitate them with available data and statistics to show where potential PUEs could be. The other issue, of course, is to contemplate, and this is probably for the ministry and others, the opportunity cost of waiting for another 3 years without any service. You cannot quantify it. So whilst it's true that mini grids are costly initially, this is a cost if you think from a developmental point of view and a national consideration, that seriously any 6 months or 1 year or 3 years waiting for the grid to come or even never to come is basically too much a cost, because when you go to these people, they tell you, but we are also Ugandans, we also belong here, and so forth. So, I mean, it's really a big challenge. And lastly, to say that as far as sensitization is concerned, particularly for PUEs, we have found that it's critical, even when you're trying to migrate them from their current sources and so forth, to take them to your grid, there is a lot of sensitization that is actually required, because there is phobia that will it work, will it be available when I need it, and so on and so forth. We saw that in Lamu, so that effort must be maintained, and it's good to know that the project in Chiumu actually focused on that, because it's
in the know and are consulted in some of these developments, but that is very, very important. Yeah, thank you so much.
Great, thanks a lot. Thanks to our panelists. I will cut it here because it's super late. But yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to you. Thanks for your time. Patrick had to leave early because he has another session and it was already starting. We'll have a very short break, maybe 5-10 minutes for a coffee. Feel free to grab a coffee or use a washroom or so. Then we'll dig into our next session. Our next session is on financing, financing solutions for mini-grids. So there's been a lot of talk here about what financing should we target and all that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So see you in about 10 minutes. Thanks a lot.